Going to start this conference, and of course you can see that there was a little bit of technical problems. Myself, I was a little bit away, and so I was not thinking that this year we should do this conference, but several friends, from New York, they were calling me and saying, you know what, we need to do something because this year is the 30th anniversary of the assassination of Thomas Sankara, and then in Burkina Faso it's a big event, and in a few minutes certainly Paul Sankara will talk about that. And then because of so many people wanted us to do this event, then finally I decided that, I needed to stop what I was doing for me to be here so that we can do this conference. But among all the emails and the calls I received, it was one that really moved me. And it was an email came from a white man from New York. I said, what? A white man from New York want us to do something on Sankara? Okay. Brian, you got me, and this is how, I said, you know what, we have to do this event. So, Brian Peterson, so you were the one who made me take the decision, and then after I thought we could do it, I had to consult my friends, Maurice Kanye, Friends of the Congo, Network Women, Parker and IPS, and then Omari Musa, and then together we came, and then thanks to them, we are here, and then we're going to have a wonderful moment. Usually, we have some friends, from the Zambia Socialist Party, who wrote a statement that I needed to read, but because I'm overwhelmed by different things to do. So Captain Sankara, 30 years later, we will remember you, and then what was assassinated was your body, and not your soul, and not your spirit, not your ideas. In your death, 1 million seeds were planted, and now they are sprouting everywhere. If today we look around Africa and we cannot find a leader who has dared what you dare to do for Burkina Faso and Africa, it's not so much for what you said, but what you actually did in the midst of an opportunity to enrich yourself. And you decided to commit yourself to the peasant and the masses and of the working class. This act, our comrade not only changed and gave dignity to the people of Burkina Faso, but hope, to the toiling masses in Africa. We now have hope that if we continue to struggle and fight, surely soon and very soon, we will strive and we will have victories. You embrace the issues of women and change lives of many. You were the voice of the voiceless, the hope of the hopeless. You are a comrade that believed in action and not in empty words. Today, our comrade, we commit to continue your legacy and your struggle. I leave you, my comrades, with this phrase from Thomas Sankara for you to reflect upon. We have to work at decolonizing our mentality and achieving happiness within the limits of sacrifice we should be willing to make. We have to recondition our minds and our people to accept themselves as they are, to not be ashamed of their reality and then the real situation, to be satisfied with it, to glory in it, and even 1985. It was a statement, a solidarity statement from Wumba Nkanza International Desk of the Socialist Party of the Zambia. Now, I'm going to call on Ben. Ben, he's going to give a solidarity statement on behalf of the Black Alliance for Peace, which was an endorser of this conference. Thanks, Ben.
So the Black Alliance for Peace was recently started, and we seek to recapture and redevelop the historic anti-war, anti-imperialist, and peace position of the radical black movement. We have several principles of unity such as self-determination, decolonization, independence, and Thomas Sankara fits in this perfectly because if you look at his life and the positions he took, he was clearly anti-imperialist. For example, at the non-aligned movement in 1983, the non-aligned movement being that different countries from what we today call the global south not wanting to take a side in east or west during the Cold War period, he in New Delhi in 1983 aligned himself with the radical wing of the anti-imperialist movement, people like Samora Machel, Maurice Bishop of Grenada, Fidel Castro of Cuba, and others. Today, we support and defend Venezuela that's under supreme attack by US imperialism. Places like DPRK in Cuba. DPRK, we know, actually stood by much of Africa during the liberation period, gave arms and weapons, even soldiers to parts of southern Africa like Angola and Zimbabwe and others, and even supported Egypt during its liberation struggle. We also, as an organization similar to Sankara, who supported the Palestinian liberation struggle, and we are anti-Zionists. We against the colonial state of Israel as it receives billions of dollars every year from the United States in aid. We also know that the Israeli Defense Force actually trains many of the United States police forces in the United States. The Israeli trains many of the U.S. police forces, including right here in the Metropolitan Police Department as well. So you see the connections across with different, particularly with Zionism and the connections between empire and anti-colonialism. Sankara is someone who stood against all these things, as well as someone who in 1983, when making a trip to the United Nations, actually spoke at the Harriet Tubman School in 1983. And he said that our White House is in Black Harlem, making a connection because he was always someone who was influenced by the Black liberation movement in the United States, particularly the radical wing in Harlem, that's sometimes viewed as the sort of national, international capital of black people around the world. So I wanted to be clear that we stand in solidarity with people of Syria and DPRK as they suffer from US imperialism attempts to undermine liberation movements around the world. And so that's the statement. Thank you, Gnaka, for the opportunity.
The next thing we're going to do, we're going to show a video. Omari Musa will represent the Socialist Workers' Party, and we're going to see an 8-minute video. You want to introduce the video, Omari, and then so that we can see it. As we know, Thomas Sankara was heavily influenced, by the Cuban Revolution, and then we've been connecting, this struggle, everything we've been doing. And the topic of this conference is about transcontinental cooperation from South Africa to Colombia, and everything that is related to, and Ben just said it, about Palestine, Cuba, Venezuela, everywhere people are oppressed. We've been talking about that, and Omari Musa is going to show a segment and then, of course, introduce the Cuban who was at the conference in Namibia.
Good afternoon. My name is Omari Musa, as PanAfrican said. I'm a member of the Socialist Workers' Party. I live right here in Washington, D.C. I think I've been to all 6 of the conferences before and engaged with everyone who was here and there in discussion. The video that we have is a speech, very short speech, by Fernando Gonzalez, who is president of the Cuba Institute for Friendship with the Peoples. ICAP are its initials. He was in the United States jails for 15 years, accused by the United States government of being a Cuban spy. He went back home and he became, along with his other 4 comrades, a hero of the revolution. That's what the Cubans think of him. Today, not only are we celebrating the life and legacy of Thomas Sankara, it's the 30th anniversary of his assassination and the overthrow of the popular revolutionary government he led. This week we also celebrate something else. That is the 50th anniversary of the death in combat of Ernesto Che Guevara. Those 2 things go together. Both were revolutionary Marxists, communists, who dedicated their energies to the advancement of workers and peasants around the world. Both had a world perspective on the struggle of the oppressed and exploited. Both sought to organize what has been called the wretched of the earth, to rise up against imperialism and take power into their own hands and cast aside the local lackeys that support imperialism, as Thomas Sankara showed. I have a very interesting book. I urge all of you to get a copy of it. The name of the book is We Are the Heirs of the World's Revolutions, going back over 150 years that Thomas Sankara absorbed. He fought to lead workers and farmers everywhere and made big strides. I'm not going to go through all of the accomplishments of the Burkinabe Revolution, but what I wanted to do is point out in this introduction that the Cuban Revolution that Guevara helped to lead continues to lead the toilers today. If there is an example you look for in the urge to fight for your liberation and the liberation of world humanity, it is Cuba today. It is one outstanding example of what a revolution is, as was Thomas Sankara. The video that we're about to show shows that this fighting solidarity between Cuba and the peoples of Africa is grown even stronger than the days when Sankara was alive. Sankara would salute all of the people of Cuba for standing strong in their fight and vice versa. The fight in Africa that Cubans contributed to, including the independence of Namibia, the solidarity of Angola, and the beginning of the downfall of apartheid in South Africa, that solidarity is the solidarity that is expressed in this video. The video comes from a conference, the 5th Conference, International African Conference, in solidarity with Cuba, as you can see. It was hosted by the president of the country, and as you'll see in the beginning, there's a beautiful portrait that the Namibian people gave Fernando for his contribution. Without any further ado, we can say the spirit of the Cuban Revolution in solidarity with Africa continues in Cuba. Thank you very much.
Brian Peterson, Associate Professor of Union College in New York, and he's a friend of the Sankara family, and he's been working on the Sankara's legacy, and he's going to talk about Thomas Sankara, the African chief.
I think it's especially humbling for me today to be speaking in front of Sankara family members. Paul, Pascal, Florence, Colette are here today, and so that's very humbling. I feel like the junior person here, you know, like the student speaking before my teachers in a way. So I feel very humbled by that and inspired to see how many people are interested in Thomas Sankara's legacy today, his words, his history, his life. And so I want to say that first. I'm a historian, and so I've been very interested in Thomas Sankara as a historical figure. And so in my teaching, you know, I use a lot of his books, I use his speeches a lot. Next term I'm teaching a class on African women, so of course I use his book on African women, women's liberation. And I've been doing some research on Thomas Sankara and the times in which he lived. But it seems to me also that you have two Thomas Sankaras, right? You have the historical person, and you also have the revolutionary icon. And so I want to talk a little bit about that sort of dynamic today. So Omar Musa was saying here about the 50th anniversary of Che's death, his execution, October 9th I think it was 1967. And 50 years ago this past week, which is a big deal. And I don't know if you remember, but then Sankara gave a speech, a kind of homage to Che 20 years later. So 30 years ago, roughly this past week, Sankara gave a speech in homage, sort of commemoration to Che in Ouagadougou. His son, Che's son, Camilo, was there. You probably read the speech in Thomas Sankara's speech, right? In any case, in that speech, you know, he talked about, you know, Che might be dead, but his ideas live on. You cannot kill ideas, that sort of thing, right? And also he spoke about, you know, the youth thirsting for vitality, for resistance, for new ideas, and how Sankara came to represent what was going on, you know, and how Che came to, they both, in certain ways, when I look at that speech now, I almost see it as a self-eulogy. As we know, Sankara would be assassinated just a week later, but when you read that speech, it's hard not to think that these words could have been said about Sankara himself, right? And certainly, you know, the youth of that period were thirsting for change. Paul Sankara, a couple of years ago when we were talking, said something about how, you know, the youth, you know, so Sankara's words were like fresh oxygen for the youth. That it gave them hope. It gave them the belief that, you know, that Africa was not cursed. That Africa had, you know, a bright future. And, you know, a lot of my research looking over old documents and U.S. Embassy cables, I did a FOIA request, so I have a lot of information to observing where Sankara was going, tracking him around the world, and you know, reading, of course, Jeune Afrique and Africanism and some of these publications to see, you know, the response to Sankara as he traveled around Africa. Everywhere he went, people were out, massive crowds pouring out, as you probably know, cheering, chanting his name. They knew his words, they knew his speeches, they'd been reading his interviews in Jeune Afrique, they'd been listening to cassettes of his speeches and interviews and things like this, you know, of that particular generation, right? But at the same time, you know, so thinking about that, okay, the connection between Che and Thomas Sankara. Do you remember 2 years ago here, you said something about having a kind of a bone to pick with the notion of calling him the African Che. And so I'm going to be a little provocative here now, if you don't mind, and explore that, you know, deepen that analysis a little bit. And while I don't want to cast aspersions on Che, I admired him deeply, read a lot about him, read his works, and consider him one of the greatest figures of 20th century history. Nevertheless, you know, I think that in certain ways it can be limiting, you know. It can be sort of to reduce him in a box, to say he's the African Che. Well, they use that phrase for Cabral, they use that phrase for Samuel Machel, and many others too. And last time I was in Ouagadougou, I met with Jean-Pascal Ouedraogo, and we were talking, Jean-Pascal Ouedraogo, who was sort of the older brother of Thomas Sankara growing up in Gawa. Taught him how to play guitar, taught him the ropes, was sort of his protector, if you will. And he was saying to me, you know, Thomas Sankara, you know, when I hear, I'm trying to remember now, he says, you know, and I was there with Valentin Sankara, the younger brother of Thomas, and we were talking about Che's legacy, and this was right around the time where there were lots of rumors in the streets that Blaise was going to mount a coup. And so Jean-Pascal went to Sankara and said, hey, are you going to do anything about it? The coup is, you know, Blaise is planning a coup. And quite frankly, Jean-Pascal got really upset. He said, you have to think about your self-preservation. You have to think about your family. You have to think about the repercussions of being assassinated, accepting being a revolutionary martyr. He said, you know, you've got to do something. You have to respond. We'll never know precisely why he did not respond. But in any case, and so we're talking about that. And this was the day that Sankara was going to give that speech, that commemoration speech in honor of Che, right? So he was over there. It was around that time. I think it was just right before the speech. In any case, he said, you know, when people say to me that Thomas Sankara is the African Che, I don't understand. I don't agree. Thomas Sankara was Thomas Sankara. You know, and I don't want to disparage against Che, but the moment he was saying, you know, Che led a revolution, a different kind of revolution, he engaged in guerrilla warfare, etc., he left his homelands, he left his family, and so on. That wasn't my little brother Thomas. My little brother was not an assassin. And so I thought about that for a while. And there's some truth there. So while we find solidarity, we find commonality and overlap between the two, I think it's also wise to think about the ways in which seeing him in an icon in that light sort of limits our understanding of the historical specificity of Thomas Sankara and the times in which he lived. And it serves to sort of decontextualize his words and kind of reduce them to a certain formula or something. Yeah, there are differences. I don't want to go down a huge laundry list of differences, but Sankara didn't engage in guerrilla warfare. He was trained as a commando, an elite commando. He certainly could do the job if called upon. That's not what he did. He was fundamentally nonviolent. He tried to transform society peacefully. You remember the UN speech when he says something along the lines of the goal of the revolution being providing 2 meals a day and water for every Burkinabe citizen, right? It wasn't about spreading guerrilla warfare and exporting the revolution. It was simple, everyday things, right? Of course, as we know, Che brought the revolution internationally. You know, he left his homelands and things like that. And of course, again, I don't want to say I have a great matter. I keep needing to say that, but only to point out the differences between the two. I think it can be very instructive in thinking about, the contributions of Thomas Sankara to history. You know, and when young Africans during the time in the 1980s were drawn to him, they were drawn to him precisely because he was an African leader who was doing things that other African leaders were not doing. With Wanyini and all the rest, were not doing these kinds of things. And so, one more point I guess I'd like to make would be that there are a lot of other people that fought with Sankara, fought for his ideals, family, friends, who were persecuted, who suffered, who were tortured, who were killed. And we pay homage to them as well. The revolution would not have been successful without all of these ordinary people, all of these other leaders who played their roles. Recently we lost, of course, one of the great figures of Burkina political history, Valer Somé, died several months ago. He played a huge role. And I think if Sankara were here today, he would probably say something along the lines of pay homage to them, right? Pay homage to the people. And rightfully so. And I don't know if you remember in one of the interviews, I think it was around 1985, 1986, something like this, and they were asking him about, I think it was Rap. Rap was asking him about what do you want his legacy to be? Something like this, or if you were afraid of being physically limited. He said, well, I would just hope that my life had been useful. I would hope that my life had contributed to, in certain ways, the cause of the people, right? And that he had fought for the people and with the people, and that being fundamentally what he hoped his memory would be. And so, I just want to say thank you so much for giving me the chance to say a few words. And
the next speaker is going to be Faye Jume. Faye Jume is from Senegal. I speak like people here originally from Senegal, based in New York, and he's the leader of a Pan-African movement that is being built now. And soon you'll hear about the movement. Faye himself is here. He's going to talk about Thomas Sankara's vision and legacy and in relation with the African Renaissance. Faye, please, come forward.
Your presence here tells me that Thomas didn't die for just nothing. People still believe in him, and when here, I'm even more excited. As excited as I was in 1986, 85 first, when I left Senegal, young, veterinarian doctor. I didn't want to have anything to do with that. I just wanted to go be with Thomas. I went in Burkina Faso, met him, and came back to Senegal, and came back and spent there about a year, from March 1986 to May 2nd, actually, exactly. I remember perfectly when I left, May 2nd, 1987. A period during which I had several times, been involved in many different of the projects. My hands are, for a long time actually remained like callous, because at one point we were digging rocks to build road, because Thomas told us, look, if we want to have to do it, if it needs to be done, and we believe we can do it, we can do it. And, so my name is Jomai, and I am, as Gnaka said, the Deputy Coordinator of the International Provisional Initiating Committee, which is running the Pan-African Federalist Congress. There are calls that are having distributed, and if you look at the bottom, and you want to be involved, there is a thing that you could fill out and hand it back to us. As the coordinator of North America, Manu Amsata likes to say to us, this movement is a very narrow focus, because our own focus is on uniting the African state, nothing else. We all only campaign for the unification of the African states. But as he said, the impact is, though the target is narrow, the impact is going to be certainly very wide. I am, I said, I need to say that I am, I have a, must admit that I'm ambivalent in my feeling. I am sad, but I'm excited at the same time. I am excited because there is no better way of remembering Thomas Sankara than being part of a gathering like this, where people are calling about action, 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 and action, and not only thought. organizing for action, not only for talk. And if you look at the topic, forging intercontinental projects, connections and concrete, I would include, to remind me of Thomas, working relations between African people for the purpose of fully repairing their dignity badly damaged by slavery, colonialism, and restoring their full dignity. Thomas was all about concrete and dignity and sovereignty. That's all what he was about. In the other hand, I said it's very difficult for me to think about Thomas in the past tense because, you know, for many years actually I told Paul this, I refused to talk about publicly about Thomas because I kind of like somewhere, I felt like no, he's not there. They're just joking. He is somewhere else. For a while I convinced myself that he is in Gabon because he was a good friend with the President Bongo's younger brother. You know, I mean, as time goes along, I mean, you know, I come to realize that, okay, you know, wake up. This is not a, you know, this is not like a trick that they're playing with you. Because if you knew Thomas, you cannot imagine that this person could be just there. This is impossible. He was so full of life, so full of love and respect for people, like human life, you know, even though he was a soldier, you know. And it's difficult to imagine that, you know, so it's this, talking about his legacy, you know, maybe this will help me, you know, close the chapter in my old delusional belief that he's still alive. You know? Now, my friend here touched a subject that is very interesting. You know, it is common knowledge that everyone knows that that man, I don't name his name, I don't use his name, was preparing something against Thomas. Thomas knew it. He was intelligent. He knew it very well. But what a lot of people didn't understand, but Thomas, see, he believed in the sanctity of friendship. You are a friend, I can't touch you. If I touch you, then I'm not a friend. And if Thomas says something, he believes in it. He is not like a fake person. Until he died, he believed that that man was his friend. And this is why he didn't do anything. And you know what? We lost him. We are very sad, you know. But there is one thing that he taught us. Dignity. Dignity. Betrayal. You cannot betray. You cannot betray. And that's a lesson for us. And I would say that I wanted to say thank you, Paul, for giving me this name. I didn't know who is here. I'm sorry, Pascal, you know, Pauline, Colette, my Mullah, you lost an uncle. We all lost someone who was dear to us. But there is one thing that Thomas has done. The name Sankara is today associated with dignity. When you say I am a Sankara, everyone believes you first before you can prove them wrong. So that Thomas brought that to the name Sankara. And even people who are not biologically linked to Sankara, and I know some of them, are using today the name Sankara to get political fame. So he did something that, you know, that to me is how I explain why he didn't do anything about this. Because it was really, you know, he could not really, he could not betray. He could not betray, and that was not in his fabric. The lessons that Thomas Sankara taught us, which mean what we call his legacy. You see, Thomas didn't spend a lot of time writing, you know, books or directing people on what to do. No, he really didn't spend time doing that. Yeah, he have his speeches, and many of them actually he did them without writing anything. Just, you know, he said what he felt, and, you know, sometimes, you know, like no one is not perfect. Sometimes he said something, oh, Thomas, you come down a little bit, you know, here and yeah. He spoke his mind, you know, and many of his speeches are just like things that come in his mind when he spoke. So many of the lessons that we can read, that we can learn from him are really what he did concretely, his actions. His actions are really where we could tell what exactly the legacy of Thomas is, what he believed in, what he was thinking, and all that stuff. All that Thomas did through his action, he was very concerned with making sure that the Africa and the Burkina Faso, Walter at that time, that he believed in, was not a utopia. He was changing things to tell people, look, we could do it if we really think of it, if we want it. If we put it in our heart and mind, then we could do it. He did not believe in anything that had to do with impossibility. His legacy is enhanced and his vision becomes clear to the common people. It is through his ability, and this is important, it is through his ability to be coherent between what he says and what he does, to be the very example of his political and societal project, that he has succeeded in mobilizing the people. That's it there. Thomas, when he said something, we know he believed it, you know, and you have no room to say anything but, you know, believe him, because he does exactly what he believed. He said. Thomas fully understood that his mission was to sow the seed of resistance to laziness, fatalism, acceptance of domination, oppression, and exploitation in the heart and mind of the Burkinabe in particular, the African peoples and the oppressed masses around the globe at large. He had no doubt that once these seeds firmly take root, the people will resist and ultimately foil any plan aimed at keeping them as stepping tools for the accumulation of wealth. The witch hunt actually that followed the elimination of Thomas demonstrated that actually he still hunted the kitchen of the enemies of the people he loved so much. The ultimate demise of this man, 27 years later, his assassin by the Sankaras, was an undeniable proof that Thomas' reading of what the common Burkinabe learned from his teaching during the time he served in various capacities within the government of Apo Volta and then Burkina Faso was right on spot. I said various capacities because Thomas didn't only start teaching when he was president. When he, in the council of ministers, like the ministers are meeting every day, he goes there on a bicycle. The other ministers are going on Mercedes. You know, that kind of like tell people, oh my God, who is this? You know, who is this? When he resigned as a minister, you know, because with all the privileges you have as a minister, he resigned and said, no, you cannot, you know, you cannot keep the people from expressing their will. You know, that was before he even became a president. So this is why when he was asked by a journalist, and this is important, when he was asked by a journalist, what does he think that the people learned from the revolution? He said himself that the most important, I think, is to have brought the people to a point where they believe in themselves and understand that they alone can write their own happiness and welfare. They can say what they desire and at the same time understand the price to pay for that happiness. And that's it, that's key. If you want something, work for it. Don't be complaining that I don't have the means, I can't do it. Don't work for it. And I just wanted, I don't know, I wanted to just make a little parenthesis about the revolution, the Burkinabe revolution. Some people say it was a coup d'etat. Some people are still lingering in that. But if you understand what was happening in Burkina, Ouagadougou particularly, when the wife of Jean-Baptiste Ouedraogo told him, the people don't want you, why don't you hand them back power? You know, Thomas was in jail, you know, and that the murderer was still in power. You know. So the people took the power. If you know the history of the Russian Revolution in 1917, the people are the ones who took the power. The army came to, you know, restore order. That's what the army did in Burkina Faso in August of 1980. But the people had already taken power. before they come. And when they took power, they asked for one man to be the leader, and it was Thomas. And I will actually conjecture right here a little bit, because you know, the assassin, I hope that you understand who I'm talking about, because I don't really use his name. The assassin knew, you know, he was jealous. I could tell that. He was jealous. And what I challenge you to do, really look at all the videos that you have seen with Thomas and that assassin. You know, all the videos. The body language and his eyes, how he looked when Thomas, you know, like when they do, you could tell that he is uncomfortable. That there is something there that is wrong. I'm not talking about in 87, where it was evident there was a rift between them. But I'm talking about actually in 83 itself, 84. You know, you look at the, and if you were in their presence, you could tell that this man, there is some sort of jealousy that he has towards Thomas. He wished that when he came from Po, that the people would give him, but people said, no, we want Thomas, sorry, you know. So that may have been one of the reasons, and some people gave him the means to do so. And, you know, it's unfortunate for him, because his name is certainly dirty in history now. So, I mean, I think that most of you are very familiar with the actions that Thomas took to really demonstrate and to teach people. And if you want to look at what the legacy of Thomas Sankara is, go look into the various actions that the government took. You know, the fact that the expenses of the state were reduced, the ministers had absent, you know, and they traveled in the economy. You know, the fact of tolerance, zero tolerance for corruption, you know, the fact of making people that they ought to feel that they are the masters of their destiny, you know, all of that, you know, and this is, you know, something here. He was not as eloquent probably as, you know, as John Kennedy to say, ask what you can do for your country and not what your country can do for you. He, through his actions, showed to people that that's what they should do. He acted instead of speaking it, you know. So his action really, and I read a quotation here, and this is why Thomas, for me, is sort of kind of the type of leader that Nkrumah was talking about when he said Africa needs a new type of citizens, leaders. A dedicated, modest, honest, informed man and woman who submerge self in service of the nation and mankind. A man and woman who abhor grand and detest vanity. A new type of man and woman whose humility is his or her strength, and whose integrity is his or her greatness. Anyone who knew Thomas, even if you are his enemy, you know that he filled that bill, that Nkrumah, whom he admired a lot. Kind of like said was the bill that the new leaders for Africa need to feed. Now I'm going to rapidly list a few actions here. Like the public health, you see, they were Cas de Santé, when Nkrumah came to presidency, Cas de Santés were built all over the place. And, you know, they were not like, we don't have enough time, nurses to go to the villages every single day to be there full time. But at least they went there on a kind of like a part-time, you know, once a week or twice to address these needs. And with the help of the military, vaccination was almost entirely done for everyone else. You know, there was also something that was fascinating, and we all laughed about it. It was like I think it was Pascal, correct me if I'm wrong. It was le jeudi des femmes, I think. I think it's something like that. I remember, you know, perfectly going to the marché of Ouagadougou, seeing men complaining that they don't have enough money for the dépense of the family. Men realized that with that simple action, Thomas showed to men, look, these women, you better be singing for them, because they are juggling a lot of things, and the money that you're giving them to go to the market and feed the family is not enough, but they are juggling with that money. And with that particular action, Thomas showed to men, he didn't go into academic discoursing, he just did a lot. And people saw exactly, oh wow, gee, the men learned a lot in one day of going to the market, you know, instead of reading like books and books of books, you know. Okay, I'm going to wrap up. 2 minutes. Well, the creation of public theaters was also something very, you know, something very, very important in terms of, because they were like, we built public theaters in neighborhood. I was involved in one in Gunga, personally, Thomas said to people that, look, you know, we have to have cultural centers. We can build them ourselves, and those were, you know, those were there. So I'm going to conclude. I'm being forced here, but yeah, I'm being actually forced. But I will just conclude, if you allow me, by saying that a legacy is not always a lessons. This is very important. Thomas Sankara's legacy is not always, it cannot be comprehended only as lessons. For a man of action like him, Sankara is, the legacy of Sankara is to finish what he started. You see, he left us a task to finish. And that is a legacy that the young people, today the Sankarists and all over, we need. That is a legacy. It is not something that we could come and say, okay, we learn. He tell us, look, I started this. I lost my life for this. You know, I put you on the right track for you to finish it now. And I think that that is one of the legacy of Thomas that actually kept me going myself. And many of the people who knew him, many of the all as Africans who came to Burkina Faso at that time to try to do the revolution with him, we went back home as Pan-Africanists. I like really Pan-Africanists, you know. And many of us kept being Pan-Africanists until today and are working for the unity and the sovereignty and the dignity of African people.
The third speaker is going to be Sean Blackman, and he's a member of the ENSO Coalition. And we'll talk about, you know, the Transcontinental cooperation, and he's going to try and connect what is happening on the continent of Africa and what is happening here in the US. Sean.
I want to thank Gnaka. I want to thank the Forum for the Revival of PanAfricanism for inviting me to speak. I always enjoy attending the conference, and I'm glad to be able to speak this year. As Gnaka said, my name is Sean Blackman. I am with the Answer Coalition, which means acting out to stop war to end, to stop war and end racism. Also a member of the Party for Socialism and Liberation, and I co-host a radio show here in Washington, D.C. called By Any Means Necessary, along with my friend and comrade Eugene Puryear, who's also here. So basically, I want to speak briefly this evening, if I could, about Sankara and the revolutionary principle of self-determination and how that spirit and that principle is playing out in different movements across the African world today. Because, you know, I'm of the opinion that for any colonial subject, for any neo-colonial pseudo-citizen, for any member of an oppressed community, there's always a kind of bubbling impulse to take the reins of those institutions which govern your life, to seize control of a society hell-bent of robbing you of your full personhood and remaking it in your image and likeness so that your material condition mirrors that tenacious dignity which you refuse to forfeit. Yes, whether expressed in a reactionary way, a liberal way, a progressive way, or a revolutionary way. This desire for self-determination is as natural as the very beating of our heart and is as instinctive as the inhaling and exhaling of our breath. Our dear comrade Thomas Sankara understood this, felt it himself on a molecular level, which is why it was so important to transform the former Upper Volta from a colony controlled first by exploiters of another shade and hue to a neo-colony controlled by folks whose face resembled that of the people, but whose interests lied only with themselves and whose loyalty lied with the oppressors of old, to finally becoming Burkina Faso, the land of upright men, where a person could have input into national development and actually benefit from their labor, to actually get to enjoy some of the fruits of the wealth that they produce, thereby creating an incentive for the people of that nation to act in the national interest, because now the national interest, in a more immediate sense, is their interest. So this change from the Upper Volta to Burkina Faso, then, it wasn't just like a cosmetic change. It wasn't just, you know, a hip thing to do, because that's what the rest of the continent is doing. It very much required a change in consciousness of the people, so that the actual shift in society that must take place on a material basis can happen. 30 years after Sankara's death, we're seeing a kind of resurgence of self-determination across the African world, with formations experimenting with different forms of radical democracy, all of them designed to repudiate the hierarchical and patriarchal character of imperialism and to make the welfare of the collective the chief concern, not the acquisition of capital. In Jackson, Mississippi, we've seen the rise of Cooperation Jackson, a movement that focuses on underemployed and unemployed black and brown workers using a co-op structure to develop what they call, quote, an alternative built on equity, cooperation, worker democracy, and environmental sustainability, end quote. And I believe it was last week we had a brother on named Jamu named Wyatt, who's a Jamaica-based educator, and he's co-authoring a book on Cooperation Jackson called Jackson Rising with Kali Akuno. And what he told us is that central to the whole Cooperation Jackson structure is the people's assemblies. Now, these are groupings with no set hierarchy that act as a form of direct democracy and participatory democracy that engages in collective decision-making, which is then carried out by a task force. And that construct comes from something called the Jackson Kush Plan, which is a construct of self-determination with its roots in the Republic of New Africa, itself a group that was based on principles of land and what we in the local movement would call black radical self-governance and autonomy. And this trickled down to the New African People's Organization and the Malcolm X grassroots movement. So now we look to Jackson, Mississippi, of all places. And when we talk about self-determination as the word, we see it there made flesh. We see similar developments in South Africa with the economic freedom fighters who describe themselves as radical, leftist, anti-capitalist, and anti-imperialist, and who ultimately believe that political power without economic emancipation is meaningless. And as the inheritors of the South African liberation movement, they explicitly state their desire to establish a society based on revolutionary values and to support anti-colonial and anti-imperialist movements the world over. And we can see Sankara's influence, I think, in the EFF's sort of explicit opposition to the oppression of women, their opposition to sexism, homophobia, and all these other oppressive ideologies. So it's become clear that a new generation of African people are recognizing themselves as living under neo-colonialism. And it's no coincidence that we tend to see a lot of overlap in their program and in their tactics, because they realize that no matter what issues plague us as oppressed people, whichever one you can talk about, ultimately capitalism lay at the root of these ills, therefore the destruction of capitalism must be central. Now, right here in the US, the Movement for Black Lives a little while ago put out a beautiful platform that not only called for an end to racist police terror and for cities to invest in the education, health, and safety of marginalized communities, but it called for community control of institutions, reparations, and political power. So you see how, you know, these same themes, these same motifs sort of keep cropping up. And these movements are basically asking the question, what can we do to wrestle power from the state and from the state's minions so that we can sort of have more control over the lives, our families, and our communities. Now, whether we're talking about Jackson, Mississippi, or South Africa, the black folks in Colombia that's protesting human rights right now, the folks in Togo who are standing up against nepotism and corruption in government, no matter where you go on this earth, you can see African people once again proclaiming that they will no longer abide exploitation, they will not abide subjugation, and they will not stand for white supremacy or neocolonialism, which, as we know, is just white supremacy in blackface, nor do we feel the need to maintain the capitalist system that gives an institutional base for its oppression. And speaking of neocolonialism, you know, it's funny, Sankara said that these neocolonial politicians and figures, they have contempt for the masses, right? They're driven only by their own selfish interests and do not hesitate to employ, quote, the most dishonest means, engaging in massive corruption, embezzlement of public funds and properties, influence peddling and real estate speculation, and practicing favoritism and nepotism, end quote.
They steal.
Hmm?
They steal.
They steal. What's the word, brother? Bullet? Yeah. You know what I'm saying? That's what it is. And so we know a lot about neocolonialism in Washington, D.C., right? Like, I mean, let's look at our mayor, Muriel Bowser, right? Black woman, young, native of this city. Sounds good, right? But we're talking about someone who in her time as mayor has actively worked to have a negative impact on the material conditions of poor and working black folks in this city. And I can think of two major ways she's done this off the top of my head. Number one, housing, certainly. All right? People like her are in cahoots with developers like Jeff Graffis and Sanford Capital to push black folks out of their homes, lie to them and tell them they can come back, and to ultimately push them out of the city so that folks get more money from them. And that's why the chocolate city ain't so chocolate no more. So who's pushing back against this? It's these very same grassroots folks. It's the tenants down in Congress Heights and Southeast. It's the tenants over in Brooklyn Manor in Northeast. And they're working with organizations like One DC and Justice First. Because, you know, their attitude is that, like, we've been here. We have a right to be here. Given their language, talk specifically about the Black Liberation Army and groups that were around in the 60s and 70s. Which is interesting because it's like, you know, if you study the history of COINTELPRO and stuff like that, it's like a rerun. Because back then they called, what, black nationalist hate groups? Right. And now anyone identified with those same sort of politics now we're black identity extremists. That doesn't even make sense. What is a black identity extremist? I identify as black. Is that what makes me extreme? And it doesn't even really give a kind of, it's just this super vague sort of thing. So it's obvious that it's been developed to cast a wide net over anyone who is critical of white supremacy, anyone who is critical of capitalism, to sort of, you know, again, make them this sort of boogeyman element. So the same system, the same state apparatus that assassinated Sankara, that assassinated Patrice Lumumba, that assassinated Malcolm X and Maurice Bishop and all these types of folks, is now seems to be ramping up to launch yet another repressive campaign. So where do we go from here? I think the most important thing we can do is continue to push forward with this spirit of Sankara and with the understanding that if we are going to have the changes that we seek, ultimately we're going to have to take our hands and reach them into the soil so that we can destroy this system that sought to make us something less than human and create a society where we can finally stand in the fullness of upright personhood. Thank you.
Something is going on in Africa. Of course, we did not have enough time, to give all the details. For those who are following the situation in Africa, in Togo, the people's movement has been in the street, for months to try and end the Eyadema dynasty. Eyadema was one of the neo-colonial leaders involved in, to advance French neo-colonialism. After 40 years in power, he put his son there. And then in 1992, they agreed upon term limits in Burkina Faso, in Togo. And I believe that that constitution was voted and adopted, and God knows how it works, on October 14, 1992. And then today, our friends are fighting in the streets, and then they want to end, the dynasty of the Ademas. And then the political party that is leading the movement over there is a Pan-African political party. And this is so we've been supporting that. My friend Maurice Kane will come in a few, to talk about some of the action that we need to do to try and support, the actions of the people in Togo. There is a campaign against the CFA franc. It's a currency that people are using in Africa, in 14 African countries. It was put into place by France. It has been in place for 70 years. And then according to the agreement since 1960 that African countries are independent, we have to deposit 50% of our foreign reserves in the French public treasury. Whoever comes and talks about it, you die. The first to die was Sylvanus Olympio, the president, the first president of Togo. And there are some young people in Africa that launch a campaign, and in many capitals, this is a powerful movement that we have to support. And it's a very interesting thing. All those signs are showing what Sean Blackman just spoke about. There is a new African that is being born. In Benin, there's a multinational, as we talk about capitalism. They call it is Bouygues. In Ivory Coast, in Senegal, in Togo, everywhere you go, in those Francophone countries, controlling water, electricity, the roads, the railroads, everything. And then recently, people in Benin, they took them to court and they won. And this is things that are happening. Of course, in the case of Babo, who was in prison at the International Criminal Court. And then after a controversial election, today, the same European who put Ouattara there in power, they can no longer come out and say that they did the right thing. And around the situation of Babo, Ivorians, Togolese, Beninese, people are fighting all over Africa to try and fight against neocolonialism and imperialism. In a few, Maurice will come and talk about that. So I just wanted to add that to the conversation. And now I'm going to call on Selome Gerima, as usual, because I know my sister. She loves Sankara so much. When she starts, when she says 5 minutes, just like that, she can take 15. But then we were looking for somebody who met Thomas Sankara, and then she always comes to our conferences, and then she never asked to be on the panel. And then she told me that she wanted to have 5 minutes, and then 5 is the one who told me, no, put Selome on the panel. I said, yes, this is a brilliant idea. So I'm happy to have one of our friends. She's been coming to the conferences, asking questions, making comments today. Selome, you have 15 minutes, 1-5, to speak to the audience.
Good evening. I hope the audience will allow me to give me 20 minutes. Because we always asking me 5 minutes, 2 minutes, all the time like that. So I hope you will help me on that. I went to Burkina Faso with my husband, Dr. Tayyip Zune, over there. was there for 20 years and me from 1984 to 1989. During my time there, it was my first time to see a president as simple as anything that I never expect throughout my entire life. I'm a 66-old mother, grandmother, and so forth. During this time, that was my first time to see a president very simple, low profile, not only him, his family, his children, and Madame Sankara and his high officials were very simple. Here now, what I wanted to share with you is, I just wanted, I just list all some of my diary during my stay in Burkina Faso. In the first place, that was my first experience to live in colonized country, independent, and I was not able to see. I was, in fact, my coming out from my country to America, and then go to Burkina Faso. I advise all my African brothers and sisters, instead of traveling, visiting La Tour Eiffel or the monument of this country, the space, the White House, it's better to visit around our continent so that our mind of thinking will be conscious. Today, you may think it as if it is a gossip, but it is not a gossip. This is my observation that I am reading to you, what I listed down, some of my experience. It was, as I told you, President Sankara was very simple and low profile. I saw him without any bodyguard, with my own eyes, riding a bicycle whenever he wanted to visit his family or personal friends. I saw him myself, a president, riding a bicycle. Sometimes he goes on Sundays with his baguette to have breakfast with his parents. He never used, as far as I have seen and got comment from my Burkinabe friends, he never used any government vehicles for his personal affairs. I used to see Madame Sankara driving her old blue Toyota car whenever she goes to work. White Renault vehicle. This is my witness. Sankara was one who changed the name of a country, his country, from colonizer's name Haute-Volta or Upper Volta to Burkina Faso, like Nkrumah, Gold Coast into Ghana. But Côte d'Ivoire, the president do not want, the ex-president who do not want us even to say Ivory Coast. It has to be Côte d'Ivoire. Okay? So, in French, Côte d'Ivoire. Yeah, that's what they meant. You know the meaning of Burkina Faso, a land of upright men. Because he believed in art and culture, he was the first leader who installed a monument for African filmmakers, the first one. He was the one who encouraged the singers, Africans in the diaspora, to come to it. Burkina Faso was the center of all revolutionaries, dialogue, panel discussions, and art, the center of art shows. Like Fella, I saw him because of Sankara, Madame Doumbia from Mali. Sankara was the first leader who registered his belongings officially. His guitar, his fridge, his blue and old Toyota, his bicycle and his monthly salary. He was very practical. He did not want to waste the government's money. He knows what Burkina Faso afford. He even, when he travels for an official mission within the continent, he either go by commercial plane, he either go through Air Libya or Ethiopian Airlines. His trip to Harlem, as you all mentioned, he went to New York for a United Nations conference. He stayed in Harlem with his African brothers and sisters who were snatched from their motherland. He had a wonderful time with his own brothers and sisters. And he says he enjoyed because he feels the touch of Africa. He tried and believed for African people not to use AC, air conditioner. You know, he was very practical. He wanted to save energy of that country. We are born without AC, this artificial man-made weather. Let's use the weather that we were born from the beginning, that we are used to. This is what he was lecturing. It was a very effective action, very practical, simple, low. And also his personality is so nice, very tender, very friendly, I just, you know, at the time when I first met my king, the late Haile Selassie, Emperor Haile Selassie, he came to me while I was pregnant with my first son. And when he comes to me, because all the time my mother, my grandmother, all the people are saying that he's a divine. And when he comes to me, towards me, and he asked me my name, I said, oh, he's a human being, he talks. I was joking, but Sankara, I met him many times. He was as simple as anybody, any regular people. Speaking of he is very strict in encouraging, not strict, but to take action in practice, in wearing our traditional African-made clothing. He wears himself, like the costume that you wear. He was encouraging to have our own textile industry growing. But now, what is going on? Thanks to the Chinese, the Europeans, the Dutch, we are killing our textile industries in Africa. We cannot get this kind of material anymore, thanks to the Chinese. They copied it and sell it in a very cheap price. But Sankara was pushing all African countries to utilize what we produce. He encouraged the agriculture, the farmers, to produce more and encourage the people to buy their own local produce food and materials. He, at one time, he also very much into sharing intellectuals within our continent. Like, for example, he said that for teaching English, we should not bring expatriates from British. We should bring from Ghana, from Nigeria, from any, thanks to the colonizers, from any English-speaking countries. And also to train a pilot or to train in aviation, let's use the most experienced Ethiopian Airlines, African Ethiopian Airlines. Okay, so he was pushing all the products and the textile what we produce, and also all of us were happy, and we were. I have seen, you know, in my life, in my time over there, I have seen imported lettuce, imported pomme de terre, potatoes, tomatoes. While we have a lot of tomatoes, vegetables in our backyard, the farmers produce a lot. So he said, no more imported goods. Let's utilize what we have. Like for any Burkinabe, he prefers to eat mango than apple, imported fruit. So this is what he was pushing. And it went that way after his assassination. I was there. My husband was on a mission. I was with my children when Sankara was when he was killed. And now, sorry, speaking in my head. Anyway, all what his feelings, his action, he wanted to do was not happening after he died. It can be a gossip, but it is not a gossip. Let me tell you my experience. After the second day of his assassination, in my workplace, an American worker walked into each department with a large serving plate of variety of imported fruits, serving to the local Burkinabe employees saying, "Félicitations, congratulations. We are now free. We can eat imported fruits." And products from abroad. The employees were very sad, but they have no choice. They do not know at that moment, because Sankara was assassin. Nobody knows what is going to happen. We do not even know if Kampaore is going to take over. We do not know what was going on. There was this military what do you call it? Military music all over the city. So that was the time when this lady brought the The other day, I went to see Madame Sankara to pay my condolence. I was moved when I see her, the first lady, in her second day. She went back to her home and with her family to a regular Burkina Faso house. The other day when my colleagues were talking about in a very bad situation, you know what she said mockingly? Oh, is that so? Tell her I can hire her as a nanny to my children. You see, this is what was happening in our continent even now. Immediately after his death, I saw Burkina a onion vendor. He has a sack of onion, local, and a sack of imported onion. I asked him, when he saw me, he was telling me, this is imported, this is local. And I asked him, why are you carrying imported onion? He told me, I'm now free. Sankara is dead. I can say whatever I can. So I asked him, are you happy because Sankara is dead? No, I'm not. But this is what the LeBlanc what is the Lebanese, they left. And when Compaoré came in his power, they returned back. So Burkina became, I never saw it like that because I arrived there during Sankara, and Burkina became completely changed. All the Europeans comes and do all this local work like shoe repairing, like a restaurant, all these things were being occupied by them. And the Burkinabe are just a hard labor. So it was so, for me it was a little bit difficult. Even during his government time, during Compaoré, during Sankara, when they invite us for any official invitation, we will notify, my husband will be notified by phone. On this date, there is going to be an invitation, an event at the palace. But after Sankara, during Compaoré, we have been invited with a fancy, expensive invitation card. You know, I'm now telling you what is, of course, it is getting worse and worse, how we are wasting that continent and everywhere black people on this earth. We are spending a lot of money for our hair, for our cosmetic, surgical affairs, for so many things. And Sankara was to have a self-determination of ourselves, to be proud of ourselves, and to be practical, not to waste a lot of money. That was his struggle. A French advisor for Compaoré, let me...
No, 1 minute 20.
A French advisor, by the way, I'm almost finished. And I will not let you without anything. A French advisor for transport for Sankara, no, for Compaoré, I'm sorry, for Compaoré, advised him that he has to have a private jet. Compaoré was using his ride through Libya, Ethiopian Airlines, commercial airlines. But Compaoré was being advised by his French advisor for transportation, and they bought, the government, Burkina Faso bought Michael Jackson's private jet for $40 million. Along with the 3 British pilots, which I saw, paid a high salary and given 5-star hotel accommodation. In addition, based on the international aviation policy, that private jet has to be serviced every 2 years, and the charge is $2 million. So that country, whom Sankara struggled a lot to save and to make a change, to improve the conditions of the people, was being replaced by extravagance. Once Compaoré took power, I noticed all his high officials were using black Mercedes. Maybe you must have seen black Mercedes-Benz sitting at the back with suit and necktie on. The Sankara style, I haven't seen. After 2 years of Sankara's assassination, I went to pay a visit to his parents with my children. In fact, one of my brother's daughter is over there. She was 7 years old when I took her to see his parents, Sankara's parents. When I go into the house, I saw a picture of both Compaoré and Sankara on the wall. I was furious. I asked his father, why you put Compaoré's picture on the wall, on your wall? He smiled and he replied to me, you know, once upon a time, both of them were my twin sons. So now I'm waiting for my son who killed his brother to come and walk through that door, pointing, and apologize to Madame and me. And I'm waiting. Guess what? After my last trip to Burkina in year 2015, I asked them what happens to how is I always, because I still mourn about Sankara. He's my brother. It doesn't matter that I'm not biological brother and sister to him, but he's my brother. So I went to see. I asked if how are they? They told me his parent has passed without an apology from Compaoré. Now, I would like to ask the audience this question. Who killed Brother Sankara? Who do you think who killed Brother Sankara? Was it Compaoré, or was it the enemy of African all over the world imperialism, which used Compaoré as the tool? You know what? When Sankara was being assassinated, it was in 1987. Haile Gerima has never gone to Ouagadougou for a film festival. Every 2 years there is a film festival.
The filmmaker, some people do not.
Filmmaker, of course. Google him, you will find him. Haile Gerima. Okay? And he never go to Burkina Faso because he was so hurted by Africans to Africans killing each other for the sake of that chair. And in 2009, our film, Teza, was being nominated for this competition in FESPACO. It was me who went there because I was associate producer in the film. And all the media was asking me, where is the director? Call him. This is his address. This is his phone number, email address. I'm here as an associate producer to present this film because we got the first, the winner, the first winner, and I wanted not the Campari, of course. Campari, if he says no, it would have been cancelled, but he knows that he didn't go. He sent some of his cultural minister to ask him to come. He didn't. And he never shared this with anyone. I don't know if he does with his wife. She's over there. I just saw her. Sharikiana Garima. But he never mentioned. In any case, I was being hammered by the media, but he didn't. And, the most important thing is, if it was in Ethiopia, his film wouldn't have been nominated, leave alone to get the first prize. But I thanked the Burkina Faso, the FESPACO, that they nominate our film, and it won the prize. And I really like Burkina. My children feel they're from Burkina. And we all Africans are one root from one family.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And he's not there, right?
Highly, for the first time, after 30 years, he went in last week.
Okay, that's the
attend.
My friend Amber Murray, a young American Caucasian, and she was supposed to be speaking from Egypt, but we have some problem with the internet connection, and she's not going to be able to do it, or maybe if something happens, maybe in the before a couple of minutes before 5. And so she's a great scholar. She's an editor of a book on Sankara that is supposed to come out this year. And it's a very wonderful contribution. And she named a daughter Sankara, so that you can see how she's attached to the cause of Thomas Sankara. Mm-hmm. Now, Maria Alice Suarez, she's a member of the Social Worker Party. And then when we're doing our activities, we have her on the panel several times. When we do not even put her on the panel, like today, she comes from New York, and then to be in the attendance and to support the cause. And I admire her a lot, and I appreciate her. And because Amber cannot be with us, I asked Mary Alice, just like in a couple of minutes, to try and give not a presentation, but something that she can say, because she's been working, and she's the publisher of the edition that published Thomas Sankara's book. She's going to talk about that. Maria Alice, roughly 7 to 10 minutes. As Solomon has taken your time too, right?
Thank you, Gnaka, and thank you all. As Gnaka said, I was asked to say a few words. I was hoping I would be able to sit here like all of you and enjoy this, all of the presentations here. But I didn't want to miss the opportunity to say, especially what Thomas Sankara, I think, means to us here in the United States and to the class struggle in the United States. Because for us, He was one of the great revolutionary leaders of the 20th century, of the world. Not only a leader of the people of Burkina Faso and of Africa, which he was in preeminence, but he was a leader of working people here in the United States as well. For what he represents, for the person that he was, which you've just heard some wonderful presentations on that today. The character, the integrity, the incorruptibility, the audacity of his leadership. But also for the profoundness of his perspective. Thomas Sankara stood out amongst the revolutionary leaders of decades in Africa for the fact that he was a genuine Marxist. Very much like Malcolm X, out of his own experiences and the experiences of the struggles of his people, coming to those conclusions and understanding that, as he said, he did not reject Marxism as a European idea or a European set of ideas, precisely because he understood that Marxism is not an idea. It's the line of march of the working people of the world to conquer their emancipation. And he placed the struggle in Burkina Faso in that tradition, saying in front of the august marble hall background in the United Nations, having the audacity to tell that entire body. He said, "I make no claim to lay out any doctrines here. I am neither a Messiah or a prophet. I possess no truth. My only aspiration is to speak on behalf of my people, to speak on behalf of the great disinherited people of the world, those who belong to the world so ironically christened the Third World, and to state, though I may not succeed in making them understood, the reasons for our revolt." And then he went on to place that revolt and that revolutionary struggle in the traditions and in the entire history of the modern working class. From the French Revolution, the American Revolution, to the Paris Commune, to the Great October Revolution, which he said transformed the world and brought to victory the proletariat that shook the foundations of capitalism and made possible the dreams of justice of the Paris Commune. That perspective, because he also added, and this is very important, that we are open to the winds of the wills of the people of the world and their revolutions, having also learned from some of the terrible failures that led to tragic violations of human rights. That is, he said, we take what is pure from those revolutions and learn from all of those lessons. That's what he represented for us. Thirdly, the place that he gave, the importance he gave to the struggles of women for their emancipation was, and one of the best demonstrations and illustrations of this, because as we all are well aware, the status of women is one of the truest measures of any society and the progress of any society. And that's where Thomas stood out enormously. He said, "The women and men of our society are all victims of imperialist oppression and domination. That is why they wage the same struggle. The revolution and women's liberation go together. We do not talk of women's emancipation as an act of charity out of the surge of human compassion. It is a basic necessity for the revolution to triumph." That was a measure of the greatness of the revolutionary capacities of Thomas Sankara, and helping to lead and foster the organization of the women of Burkina Faso to make that revolution. And so, finally, it's the internationalism of Thomas Sankara. Not placing the struggles in Burkina Faso in the history, in the international history of the modern working class, but helping to lead the struggle throughout Africa against the apartheid regime, solidarity with the struggles in Angola and Nicaragua, throughout Latin America and the rest of the world. I myself had the tremendous privilege of meeting and having a chance to talk and discuss with Thomas Sankara in Nicaragua in 1986, when he was chosen as the main international speaker for the 25th anniversary of the founding of the National Liberation Front of Nicaragua and its leader, Carlos Fonseca. That and his identification with the Cuban Revolution above all as the one that provided a beacon in the world for what it was possible for working people to accomplish when they take power in their hands and begin organizing on that foundation. And in today's world, these lessons stand out for all of us with increased sharpness. The problems we face here in the United States are not this or that president at any particular time. Our problems are much more profound than that. They can be influenced and looked at on the edges only, by whoever occupies that post. But because it's capitalism, and it's the exploitation of human beings by other human beings, and the system that they have created, that is where our problems are rooted. And that is what we must address, and that is why the unity of the struggles, in struggle, that's how unity is forged. It's in struggle, together. And that is what we face today in the world, and why what Thomas Sankara represents, what he stood for, what he fought for, what he led every minute of his conscious political life is for all of us, not just for Burkina Faso, however important that is, not just for Africa, however important it is, but for the working people of the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, now we're going to have a Q session in a few minutes, but I would like to call Cynthia Deshola Dawkins.
Thank you. I want to start with a quote from my late son, Timothy Dawkins. We're going to instill the right kind of confidence in our people and take our community back square mile by square mile. I'm here today, well, I came here today to hear and learn more about Thomas Sankara. But I was asked, surprisingly, to speak, and I'm glad I had the opportunity. So I started the Timothy Dawkins L Project, and I also co-founded that is because first just to found my son's, to start a legacy for my son, who was unfortunately murdered, someone took his life to community violence. My son was an activist, a public speaker. He traveled with Miriam Wright Elderman. The Huffington Post wrote an excellent article on him after his passing. And also, I'm the voice for mothers who don't have a desire to get out of their bed anymore in the morning because they lost their child to either community violence or police brutality. I realized that there was a time that there was no organizations available for people who looked like myself. And so that is one of the reasons why I started and co-founded the Coalition of Concerned Mothers. We needed to have a network of mothers who could come together, support one another, and know that they're not alone in our fight for justice for our children. My son can no longer speak, and I know that I can never never maybe get justice for my son. But I'm here to fight and prevent other mothers and families from having to suffer through the pain of losing their loved one, their child, to gun violence. Timothy was a wonderful individual. He wasn't a perfect child. He was my baby boy. I have 5 sons. Timothy enjoyed singing. He was loved by many. He was a mentor in his community. So it was no reason why anybody should have taken my son's life. One of the reasons why our children are losing their lives is because of this government. They refuse to pass common sense gun laws in our communities and our society today. They allow military-style weapons, which my son was killed by, a 9mm Glock, for civilians to possess and access these weapons. Our police are using the same forms, the same types of weapons to kill our children. We, as an organization, realize and recognize that these are not isolated incidents. So that is another reason why we formed a coalition, because it is not only the Tamir Wrights, the Trayvon Martins, the Philando Castilles that you hear about. It's everyday citizens across our country. This is no longer, has become a human rights issue. It's genocide. If our country is not providing the correct laws to prevent these types of brutalities from happening in our communities, then they're allowing, this is considered genocide. That's the bottom line. Okay, so that was my little touch to let me know I'm going over my time. But anyway, thank you again. And I just want to ask you all, please, to, you can follow us on Facebook, Coalition of Concerned Mothers. Support us.
Maurice Kane, Director of Friends of the Congo, is going to talk, everything. When you do those conferences, and I will talk about that in a few, people say, why are you even celebrating Sankara? So people ask me that question, why are you talking about the Nkrumah? Why they're dead? But I've been living here for quite some time, and then every day I hear about some people who contributed greatly to world history, like George Washington, who was a slave master, Thomas Jefferson, who was a slave master.
That's right.
And then, they were great men. They contributed greatly, to bring something to world civilization. But every day they celebrate them here. But when it comes to celebrate our heroes, I see some unconscious Africans asking me, why you talk about Sankara? And we have to talk about them because Africa, for the last 600 years, we've been under subsequent systems of oppression, from slavery, colonialism, Jim Crow, segregation, lynching, apartheid, neocolonialism, globalization, and poverty, and the same system is today oppressing. And now, we were fighting against the European, America, France, England, but now we have China, and then my sister Selene spoke about that. China is there, so we have all those powers going back to Africa, taking the lands of Africans, and any initiative undertaken by any African that do everything possible to undermine our spirit of self-determination. That's why we talk about the people who set the examples for us, you know, to try and take our destiny in our hands and then to be the change we seek to see in the world, or to be the change we want to see in Africa. We will talk about Sankara, we will talk about Nkrumah, and we will talk about all the people who did the right thing for Africa and the global African diaspora. We, of course, talk about Fidel Castro, Che Guevara, and all those who stood for justice, freedom, and solidarity. I'm going to call now Maurice Kane, Friends of the Congo. He's going to tell us a little bit what are the actions that we can take, you know, so that, you know, there can be like a follow-up, you know, conversation after this conference. Maurice Kane.
Over the last few years, there's this tremendous youth vitalism that is confronting the neo-colonial regimes that have been imposed on African people. Whether it's the economic freedom fighters in South Africa, or you have Ballet Citoyen in Burkina Faso, or Y'en a Marre in Senegal, or in the Congo, where I do a lot of work with the Telema movement. So there are strong movements that are unfolding on the African continent, Pan-African movements that need our support, need our solidarity. And because we're here, right in the heart of the empire, in the United States, particularly here in Washington, D.C., we are strategically placed to join them in solidarity. So there are a series of actions that we're going to request of you, or ask of you, to help advance the movement that's unfolding on the African continent and in the African world. First and foremost, I know the bulk of you reserved the RSVP, so we have your data. But for those of you who did not RSVP, we encourage you to sign up with us. I believe NEFA has a sign-up sheet in the back there with Ben. Please, we'd like for you to sign up in our database so that we can stay in communication with you, share with you what's events that are upcoming, and also what's unfolding on the continent with the different movements, so that you can be well informed. We can't ask you to take action if you don't know what's happening. And by virtue of your signing up with our email list, we can keep you informed. Another critical way for you to remain informed on a consistent basis, we have Muiza Mutali with WPFW 89.3 FM every Wednesday from 1 to 2 p.m. He's on the radio, and he brings people from throughout the African world that are engaged in movements for change to the Washington, D.C. audience. So, Muiza, if you can put your hand up there, please. Before you leave here, make sure you talk to Muiza, engage Muiza about what he's doing, the work that he's doing, and support WPFW. We're talking about informing the community. Probably one of the most, if not the most valuable, one of the most valuable institutions that we have locally is WPFW Radio, 89.3 FM. Muiza does his Wednesday shows. NEFA has a Tuesday morning from 9 to 10. And he also deals with the African world and global issues. So it's imperative for us to support that local institution. They're in their fund drive right now. So they need your support. It's a radio station that's driven by local support, no corporate dollars. If they had corporate dollars, they wouldn't be able to bring you information like you're having here today. This is the kind of information that they bring to you over the airways. So it's, you're saying? I didn't hear what you said.
Esther was on the show.
Oh, okay. Oh, I didn't see Esther. Yeah, right. So that everything. One thing that everybody can do in here today is to support WPFW. If you want to advance the African movement, the African world, you support WPFW. We keep that radio station online. We fund it, and what they do is they bring us information from all over the African world, people's struggles that are unfolding. So, as I said earlier, I can't ask you to take action if you don't know. And one of the ways, locally here, that you can know is by tapping into WPFW. And they're able to provide you the information that they provide because we support them. So, sign up for the email list. Listen to the shows that we mentioned. We have Esther here. Esther Rivera, her show is on Fridays at 10 a.m. on 89.3 FM. So WPFW is in the house. Sign up for the email list. Listen to WPFW. Support WPFW. We also have organizations. If you're not a member of an organization, we encourage you to join the organizations that are here. We have the Answer Coalition. Omari is here. He presented earlier with the Cuba Support Committee. We have PanAfricanism, of course, NEDFA, Friends of the Congo. We have a table outside. So if you're not a member, we encourage you to join one of the organizations. Even if you don't join, support us. Most of the organizations are volunteer-led institutions. So they can use your support in your intellectual support, your material support, and your financial support. For getting more information about how to be involved, I highly recommend two key sources that are online. Black Agenda Report will keep you up to date. If you can support Black Agenda Report, they're constantly reporting from a progressive perspective, from Pan-African perspective. Pambazooka, they're at blackagendareport.com, so you can write that down, blackagendareport.com. And also another key source is Pambazooka News, Pambazooka. If you can follow Pambazooka, sign up for their email list. You can follow us at Friends of the Congo. We not only put out information about the Congo, but Africa at large. On Twitter, we're at Congo Friends. At Congo Friends on Twitter, and for our website to support the youth movement that's unfolding in the Congo, it's Telema, T-E-L-E-M-A, telema.org, T-E-L-E-M-A. I believe Thomas Sankara's brother, Paul, is going to come up after to talk about the Sankara memorial that they're building in Burkina Faso. So he can give you specific information as to how, is Paul still there? Yeah, so he can give you specific information as to how you can support the Sankara Memorial. So these are the ways in which you can be engaged, remain engaged with us, and support the movements that are unfolding on the continent. Sign up for the email list. Support our local radio station. Join an organization that's here, involved in the movement here in the room. I gave you the information already for our Friends of the Congo. Again, it's telema, Telema.org. Follow us on Twitter at Congo Friends, and you can be very well plugged into everything that's unfolding on the African continent. And I'm sure the speakers are going to give you further actions that you can take as well. So thank you very much, and thank you for coming out today, and we really appreciate your support. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Maurice Kane is the director of the Friends of the Congo. Okay, I'd like to, thank, some friends. My friend Lambert, Dr. Kofi Kwadjo, drove all the way from North Carolina to come, and Lambert. Of course, we have Mary Alice Walker, Marie Alice Waters, we have Peter, came all the way from New York, my friends, the Burkinabe community, Aruna, Sawiniti, Salogo, Bukari, Yannick Zagre, Bubaka, and anytime we do things, they come all the way from New York. I appreciate it. And I had the opportunity, to talk about the Ivory Coast crisis Maurice Kane was a great helper, Netfa Freeman, my same friend, Eugene Perrier, Sean Blackman, Elder. But there was an institution that when we meet, we may consider that institution to be not always in favor of the interests of Africans, but there are some decent people over there, decent. And then they gave us the opportunity to talk about our plight and our struggle. And so they're here. And I'm going to mention one of them, and you should praise that it's not, maybe not the institution, but the people. I'm talking about Voice of America. Talking about Voice of America, I have two people from Voice of America here. I don't know if he's still here. Eric from Burundi gave us the opportunity to talk about African issues. And then Mtimiake Mwakalele from Zimbabwe. And then who interviewed me and interviewed many other people. So Mtimiake is here. We want to see her hand. Great African woman, and we have to acknowledge the struggle. She hasn't lost her soul, even though she's working in a neo-colonial institution. Now we're going to go and talk. We're going to have the Q&A session. We're going to have the Q&A session now. And so if you have any question, we still have 40 good minutes, and after, towards the end, our sister Riema, she's going to perform, that she has a cultural performance not anymore. Oh, you want to do that now? No, the speaker has been waiting, so let's give the opportunity to the speakers to answer questions, and then we come back to that. Okay, do you have any questions? Because Brian Peterson, he hasn't spoken much. He spoke like maybe 10 minutes. So please ask the first question to Brian Peterson, and now we're going to move to other speakers. Okay.
Yes, I'm saying that goes at number 10, and in soccer, that's the one who scored. So I said, okay, you can go and put some score.
Okay.
No, I want to just thank everybody to be here tonight. That's grateful. In Burkina Faso, October 2014, there was a new revolution, the second one. Because they get rid of the 27 years regime, mainly the youth, not only. And they call themselves the Sankara's generations. That's why we are proud today, even if it's not here physically, the idea is still alive, and it seems to me that it will be forever. The second point is, it's not just the family. Thomas Sankara himself was saying in his public speech, even if you kill me, thousands of Sankaras will reborn. And I have the evidence tonight, the proof tonight that you guys are part of the thousands of Sankaras. Now, a memorial project has started since 2016, and they had a big event this year on October 2nd. The president of the committee for the construction of the memorial is the former president of Ghana, Jerry John Rawlings. So that's why Haile Gerima was there, Solomon's brothers, for the first time after 30 years. And the last thing that I want to say quickly before sharing the floor with you is what can we do to advance the case in justice. Thomas Sankara's case in justice. Since 1997, an international commission has been set up to seek truth, justice for Thomas Sankara and others victims, not only him. So concretely, what can we do from here in link with the different groups in Senegal, in Canada, in Montpellier, in France, and of course in Burkina Faso? That's the open question that anybody can bring with the idea of concrete contribution. Thank you. And la patrie ou la mort. Patrie ou la
Interested, I guess, since you asked the professor to have a little bit more time, I'm interested in hearing a little bit more about the connections between various Pan-African leaders and and that sort of 1960s period, moving forward. So we know that Ghana is the first in 1957 to gain independence, but I'm wondering if you could kind of draw some more through lines for us around what Pan-Africanism meant then and what it means now, and the ways in which all of the leaders were kind of borrowing from each other. Like I know Nkrumah actually set up an institute. A lot of them were very heavily involved with each other. I know Lumumba, Patrice Lumumba was interested in an African Union like the European Union to think about that economic independence piece. I'm just wondering if you could really help us to make some of those connections around their shared thinking and then how they diverged, and then what that tells us now about Pan-Africanism and what the opportunities might be for us to participate.
Okay, thank you.
Things that were going on in Asia, Asian nationalist movements, of course, the wars that were happening in Indochina, fighting against the French anti-colonial warfare that was going on there. And obviously, the international left played a huge role too. A lot of them had studied in Europe, in different places. Senghor and others, had studied in France, others had studied in the UK, so there was a certain kind of intellectual lineage there. A lot of them had met in the so-called metropole. Let's see, what else would you want to say about this? More?
The importance of Ghanaian independence?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the importance of Ghanaian independence as a symbolic moment. Nkrumah calling for a United States of Africa, that Pan-Africanist idea, was in wide circulation. And I think a lot of people drew a lot of good inspiration from that. A lot of it, I think a lot of these movements were forged and got a lot of momentum through national liberation struggles at that time. I mean, it's hard to imagine right now national liberation wars going on all over the place, but in the 1950s and 1960s, that's precisely what was happening, right? And the United States was involved in Vietnam, and so that was, you read Fanon, you read a lot of the stuff that was being written at the time, that was a certain sense that history was changing. And it wasn't just the working class, it was also the peasantry. I mean, Che and Mao, the whole thing was reaching out to a broader population base than just the petite bourgeoisie or, the workers and so on. And I don't know where to stop or how to word it.
It's fine.
Okay.
If I want to add something, and after that, I will give an update myself. Yes, go ahead.
I mean, it's a very interesting question. If I understand, you're trying to understand what is the status of the Pan-African movement itself.
What did it mean then, and how has it evolved?
Well, fundamentally, let's say at the beginning, Pan-Africanism means solidarity between the slaves on the cotton fields. If you read Uncle Tom's Cabin, Uncle Tom himself, the refusal to reveal the name of that woman who escaped, that's Pan-African, that's where Pan-Africanism was born. Later on, we have had the intellectual with Sylvester Williams conference in England that took over but before that, in 1887, there was a conference in Chicago. That's where the first time the word Pan-African gathering was mentioned. Sylvester Williams was actually continuing that, but the Pan-African movement has really never been a homogeneous movement. Let me just put it that way clearly. Because you had one time, you had Booker T. Washington, and then you had Du Bois, who were at exact opposite in terms of what is the role, whether black people should do menial work or should pursue intellectual excellence, so you have had... Well, it's such a vast question that it's difficult to wrap it up because, during the time of the independence, you have three things that happened in the Pan-African. Because Pan-African, when it talks about, first of all, it started with the abolition of slavery. It's a structural question in terms of the relationship between black people and power. Black people and the capacity to determine what they want to do with their lives. That is the structure. It has always gone through that course. In the 1960s, starting after the 1945 Congress in Manchester, where Du Bois, where Nkrumah, where Padmore and them were, the structural question that was addressed was independence and civil rights. Civil rights here in America, so that American blacks here could be able to vote, could be able to say, okay, this is the person I want. It's a structural issue. Independence in Africa because black people could determine the people who lead them. So that, and then the other revitalization of the Pan-African movement came with the anti-apartheid movement. It came to addressing the issue of black South Africans being able to be involved in decisions affecting their lives. So and right now we are preparing for the 8th Pan-African Congress, second version. The first one we took it in Ghana. The second one we're preparing for Namibia. It probably will be in June 2018. And all of these reconciliations of the Pan-African movement, we're trying to at least reassess what would be today. Today, for today's generation, like him, like others, what would be the structural change that Pan-African can address in order to mobilize all black people for that particular change, like they were mobilized anti-apartheid, independence, for independence, and so on.
Thank you,
Around here, there now, and the young waking up and being aware of their condition. But I have a concern that I wanted to ask people in the audience of how can we not create transparency but maintain it? Because many people I have seen them as idols growing up. And then when they get in front of the leadership, the whole thing changed after. And we all know that revolution and Thomas Sankara case has been used as marketing right now. So how can we create no transparency by maintaining?
That the president doesn't have to answer. If you say anything about the president, oh yeah, you lie, you don't have any respect for the president. The thing is that to get the people's power first, let the people get the power. As whether it is a communist power, whether it's a communist power, the people getting the power and conscious, like Sankara was saying, that's the thing. When the people are conscious that the government, that the wealth of the nation belongs to them, and that those people who are up there are only their representative, then they can demand for transparency. But if the people think that those who are there are brought there by God, if the people continue to think that, or at least see the state as illegitimate, then there can be transparency, because the people who need it, who deserve to have it, will have it. Jesse Ventura used to say, if you only are involved in politics 15 minutes, that's all what you will get as back as people getting you or being accountable. If you are involved 15 minutes only, you will get only 15 minutes accountability, and that's it. So that's the people get involved.
I just want to say something.
I want to say something.
Oh, you go.
Is this working?
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My experience, I don't think it is.
Yeah.
You know what? My experience from adulthood until oldhood, it is very important for all African black people in this universe have to be aware of ourselves. We have to love first ourselves. We have to respect ourselves. We have to be love to each other. We have to take that African Union to be reformed, because it is every one of us too good. We have to be the center of them. You know what? Africa is not what the West are decorating us. They want us three quality. That is famine, war, and drought. If we have that quality, we are good for foreigners. So, and the opposite side is Africa, when Creator created this universe. Africa was the first of his work. And we are so much gifted with natural resources that we are being exploited, killing each other for the sake of diamond, all that resources. If you take Niger, Niger is a very small country with a small population. It has what? Uranium. Yeah. This uranium is the superpowers are using it for their atomic bomb, for their jet, for their, what do you call this, cell phone,
TV, flat screen,
for everything. And they take it from us. We are a giver. We are a sellout. We have to be very conscious about ourselves and take care of our resources. Otherwise, unless we love each other, unless we united each other, unless we protect each other, Africa or Pan-Africanism will not be existing.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, quickly, I think your question speaks to the importance of ideology over identity, right? And I think that's actually a mistake we make even in the current activist culture. I mean, we want to set somebody up who's, they're oppressed 7 ways till Sunday, but that doesn't mean that they know anything or are capable of anything. And so, ultimately, the fact that someone is a member of an oppressed group doesn't sort of automatically imbue them with a desire to fulfill the interest of that group. So ultimately it's a question of, what makes a leader, you know what I mean? Because regardless of who they are, what they look like, their background or whatever, if they don't have principle, then they aren't going to be of any use to you. And it also makes me think about the style of leadership we have. I think one of the most valuable lessons that the movement for Black Lives took from the Civil Rights Movement, the Black Liberation Movement, is how we stay away from the kind of individual charismatic leader in these kind of strict hierarchical types of organization. You know what I mean? So we trend toward a more collective decision-making process. Now some folks take it a little too far and they're kind of all over the place, so they find it difficult to organize things. But generally speaking, we tend to function from a core group of organizers, you know what I mean? So it's sort of like when the decision-making and the way things come down are made in a collective way instead of just these edicts from on high, it tends to make the process more democratic. So that's what I would say.
Okay, so,
Yes, just very briefly.
Yeah, briefly.
Indeed. We have to recognize the depth of the crisis of the capitalist system on a world scale, the world in which we are living today. It's not the world of 25 years ago or 30 years ago, much less more. This is something new that is happening in the world today, and it will get deeper, and it's the crisis that the people of Africa are living in. It's the crisis that the working people of the United States are living through, and everywhere else. But it is out of those struggles and that crisis that new generations and new leaders will emerge in the course of those struggles. That's been the history of the entire history of the class struggle worldwide, and out of that the character of those leaders also. The integrity is a proletarian trait, and it's the proletarian struggles in the future that will produce those leaders.
It's a vicious cycle, it's a self-perpetuating cycle is what I would say. If we had actual leaders in office who were not hungry for money and more so about the people of their country and wanting to bring their country to a beautiful place and not try to replicate the West, then we can have some actual systems and policies in place. But it doesn't matter if there's nobody who actually has the power to implement these things and enforce them.
Okay, thank you, sir. that will be the last question because we have to, respect the people who, give us this venue. So, sir, question.
Yes.
It looks like the one before you was more a contribution than a question.
Yes. My concern is how do we get back to the original state? And that is before European rule, European dominance, and before the approximate 6,000 years. If we come from a great, majestic, and glorious history, my understanding, I'm going to present the question. My understanding, if you lost something, my understanding, most people say you must retrace your steps. I'm thinking retracing our steps, and I'm posing this as a question, I'm thinking retracing our steps must go back beyond the 6,000 years of European rule and to the high point of our civilization and our majestic, glorious past. Now, my concern is, I think maybe with the historians and others, we make that journey back through science and the information. Hold tight. Now, my concern, I hear about workers. Workers are good, but my concern is how do we retake, and claim ownership. Ownership, to me, is greater than saying I am a worker, even though I may be a worker and struggling. And my concern is how do we go and how are we thinking about how do we seize and take ownership again?
Okay.
National Conference on the Budget invited all the CDRs, representatives of CDRs, the provincial heads to Ouagadougou, fully transparent. They did a full night, all through the night marathon, and they hammered out the budget. Ordinary citizens, all contributing their thoughts. Do you remember this National Conference on the Budget? Fully transparent. Everyone was there contributing their thoughts. What should we do with the money? How should we divide up the pie? We're all taxpayers. We'd like to know, where does our money go? So we just have to push for that. Accountability, I guess, and transparency.
Very quickly, I think if I understand the question is how do we go back, where is the brother who asked? How do we go back to pre-colonial values in Africa? Is that the question or no?
Pre-colonial seizing and taking ownership.
Well, yeah, how do we regain our culture, our cultures, before colonialism, I talk about? Our
glorious majestic past.
Yeah, you see, in the Pan-African Federalist movement, we have a proposal. We have a proposal because many people talk about Africa as tribes. Africa is made up of nations that has been cut into pieces to form nations that don't represent anything, really, but that represent more administration than a people. I give the case of Kenya. The Maasai, for example, are divided between Kenya and Tanzania. The Luos are divided between Kenya, let's say, for example, of Uganda. See, what we believe what we could do as the Pan-African Federalist movement is once we unite Africa, we could have what we call cultural districts to put back these nations, that these districts, which are not going to be political but purely cultural, to rejuvenate the culture of these nations so that people could be studying, for example, a Maasai in Kenya or in Tanzania could start school in Maasai instead of studying in English. So that's the kind of, I guess that's what our belief can be done.
Open the event with balafons, since Burkina Faso really have beautiful balafon, or kora, or some African music. Because typically when we have functions, when we have bongies or gatherings, we have music. I had one of my teachers to tell my children, before we start to have a discussion, we must sing a little bit. And so that was the premise. But I got a call saying, will you dance? So I can't.
Microphone.
And I called my girlfriend, and so we're not properly dressed in the outfits like we would like to, but you know, we're here to bring that ambience and that energy, okay, to bring it up. We actually wanted to go earlier, but I wanted to wait for her to come so we could dance in unison, because dancing in unison has another essence than dancing. So.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thanks. I want to thank the panelists. You know, let's give a round of applause to the panelists, and to the performers, and to all of you who came, you know, for this conference. If you want to say one thing, sister, can you say that in 45 seconds?
Okay, excuse me. On the week of October the 23rd through the 29th, we're having the 20th anniversary reunion for the Million Woman March. It's happening in Philadelphia. So if you can go online and go to Million Woman, not women, millionwomanmarch20.com. Sign up, donate $1 or more, come to the events. It's the Million Woman March and beyond. So there are several workshops and projects and businesses, and all this is launching. Also, October the 25th is International Solidarity Day, International Solidarity Day for women and girls of African descent. So go to that site and check it out. Thank you, love you.
Thank you. Okay, one more thing. The president of the Burkinabe community, Henry, told me before the beginning of the conference that at the National Art Gallery, are you familiar with that? The National Art Gallery here in Washington, D.C., there will be tomorrow, like a photo exhibition of Thomas Sankara. I was shocked to find out that, so I just want to share that with you. It's a film, right? At the National Art Gallery tomorrow. Okay, film showing tomorrow on Sankara there. So, thank you very much. We have some food. Please do not go. You cannot go. You cannot leave the space if you don't eat that food. In Africa, it's not a good way of dealing with your host. So please go, get something to eat. We're going to exit the room.